Sure.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our regular Tuesday evening. Wow, second week of January already. That's a very scary thought, but it's been good. It's been a good day. It's been a good month so far, and we're raring to go. And after last night's meeting, the corporate near life meeting, where they spoke about TNN, I had to have a little bit of a chuckle because that is exactly what I'm covering tonight. But I had done my presentation before they did their bit. So we're getting back to basics. Last week we covered obesity, which is a problem. And I thought, let me actually go back a step further to what causes it. And once we've covered the causes, you'll understand a little bit more about where and what and how these conditions come about. So as per usual, I am going to share my screen. And hide all these other goodies. And hide all these other goodies. Go. And let me shrink me down to nothing. So we're going to cover a brief history of where our health started failing. Because it wasn't yesterday, it wasn't last year, it wasn't even 10 years ago. It went back a lot further than that. And it's been steadily declining. So as soon as man started getting clever and thinking he knew more than what God did, things started going south from there. So way back before the industrialized era, ill health and obesity was almost unheard of. If you were obese back then, you were generally considered sick because there was often a problem as to why that person was so grossly overweight. And if you go back in history, you'll see a lot of the like the Roman emperors who used to have many, many feasts, and those sort of people, sort of the upper echelon people, were often overweight and ill as a result. And the poor people thought that because they were poor, they were being hard done by, whereas in fact, they actually had the better health. And unfortunately, they decided they wanted to be like these emperors and other people, but they didn't, looking well fed, etc. Apologies. But they didn't realize that it actually wasn't the correct way to be. So people didn't live as long as they do these days. But apart from dread disease, such as things like bubonic plague and measles epidemics and physical accidents, which were the most common things like obesity, heart attacks, cancer, etc., they just didn't exist. And if they did, it was the extremely rare occasion that they did exist. The main reason, in my opinion, was they ate healthy. And when we talk healthy, often people talk about, oh, but I eat a healthy diet, meaning that they don't eat junk food on a weekly basis, but maybe they eat junk food once a month, possibly, or things like that. But they think they eat healthy, but they don't always. And way back in the Dark Ages, if you wanted meat, you had to go and get it. You had to go and hunt it down in the area that it was ranging free. And as soon as it was killed, and usually that taking out of the meat involved a lot of running as well, which obviously was your exercise, and you ate it fresh. Quite often they ate it raw. And vegetables were either free range because it was things that were growing wild, or they were cultivated organically because they didn't have any of the fancy pesticides and other stuff that we've got these days. It was good old-fashioned cow manure, horse manure, and water that was the organic fertilizers that they used. And sugar was a luxury very few people could afford. Ironically, those who could afford it were the ones getting sick. Why nobody picked that up? It's a difficult question to answer. And for those who remember back to the World War days, I think most people on here are almost too young for that, but if you remember back there and you knew people from that era, you will know that sugar was an extreme luxury. And if you could get hold of sugar, well, you looked after that as if it was a very, very rare gift, which it was. And today, unfortunately, we've got way, way too much sugar in everything. So whole grains, one of the staple crops in all countries is whole grains. We don't get the same grains in every country. Some places grow soy, some places grow wheat, some places grow corn, or rye, or various other grains. But there are whole grains in every country in the world. The bread that is often mentioned in the Bible was absolutely nothing like the bread we know today. I think if we had to get hold of some of the bread that was mentioned back in the biblical days, we wouldn't actually recognize it as bread as we know it today. There's that old myth that prisoners were fed a diet of bread and water. And back then, you could actually live on that. I don't think you could live on that today. And if bread was made like it was biblically, then you could actually survive on that diet. Today, bread would kill you if you had to eat it exclusively, not to mention the water we consume out of our taps. I know certainly down here on the South Coast, I dare not drink the water at the taps. And when we do have tourists around here that drink water at the taps or go down to the sea, they quite often land up in casualty because of all the bacteria and bugs in there. So what is a whole grain? What should it look like? It should look like on the left-hand side where you've got your, they call the endosperm, which is the starch, carbohydrate, the natural sugar. And it's got the bran, which is covering, that's the hard, rough bit on the outside. And it's mostly fiber. And it's also full of B vitamins and minerals. And then inside you've got the germ, which is a nutrient-packed core with B vitamins, vitamin E, phytochemicals, and healthy fats. Now, if you've ever watched nature eating a mealie kernel, corn kernel, have a look at a corn kernel next time, and you'll see that inside there's that little white bit, which is your germ, and then you've got the yellowish part on the outside, which is the fiber, and then you've got the bulk of it, which is your endosperm. And when you watch an animal, specifically a bird or even a monkey, eating a mealie, what is it that they eat? They eat the germ, and they ditch all the rest of it. What do humans eat? We eat the rest of it and ditch the germ. So I think animals sometimes are a little bit brighter than what we are. So the refining of grains dates back to Roman times. And the Romans developed a crude technology for removing the bran and the germ from bread. And if you look back at the period movies, you'll see that they used to have these great big round stones, millstones, and they pushed the wheat or the grain through there, and that crushed out a vast majority of the excess stuff that they didn't want. And that's where they got their grains from, basically. And they'd often either use donkeys or horses or slaves. Think back to Samson, where it's mentioned over there. And archaeologists have noted an increased incidence of tooth decay in the strata reflecting in this period of time. So the more refined the grain is, the more prominent is the ill health. Throughout much of history, refined white flour was a luxury item that was enjoyed only by the wealthy. And this all changed in the 1880s with the development of the steel roller mill in Hungary. The refining of flour increased substantially after World War II. One of the marks of the success of extending shelf life today is the fact that weevils and other insects are never seen anymore in the food supply. If you see weevils in your food, what do? You chuck it out. Think of pasta, spaghetti. If you open the can and you see it starting to move, you know it's full of weevils and it's time to get rid of it. Now, it sounds really gross. I do understand that part. But if you think about it, way back when prisoners and slaves were actually fed this stuff, those weevils, as gross as it sounds, were a really good source of protein. I know people don't really want to hear that, but it's been said, the difference between what you will and won't eat is 24 hours, because it all depends on how hungry you are. And as a result of removing all the weevils and things, this has made food processors unbelievably rich. Unfortunately, foods that will not support insect life will not support healthy human life as well. So think about it. If the bugs won't eat your food, what makes you think that the food that you're eating is actually healthy? Again, are bugs and animals brighter than humans? I don't know. A nutrition pioneer by the name of Weston Price admonished those who listened to him in the warning that if a food would not support insect life, it would not support the health of children either. He assessed the nutritional value of grains by the amount of insect life a given quantity of grain could sustain. So just get myself out of the way over here again. Until the invention of the steel rollers in 1839, grains were ground by hand at a slow speed and low temperature. With rollers, the process quickened and it became easier to separate out the different parts of wheat, the germ, endosperm, and bran, and hence came the emergence of white flour. Because what are we left with? We're left with the endosperm, which is the starch, which is essentially plain, pure sugar. Since this and the processing of 3 other staples of health, sugar, fats, and dairy, there's been a highly documented rise in degenerative health issues, including arthritis, allergies, asthma, cancer, depression, mental disorders, and heart disease. And furthermore, the more we consume white flour, the greater the research grows against it. For one thing, white flour cannot support life. So my question is, why do we see so much of this stuff in the shops? And why are we still buying foods that are made from it? And just like the medical field, unfortunately, one has to look at the greed. You know, when everybody knows and everybody talks about big pharma, well, we need to talk about big food as well, because they are also just as much at fault as the big pharmaceutical companies. And this is why it's so popular among manufacturers. Let me just get back to that. So white flour cannot support life. So this is why it's so popular among manufacturers, because insects will flourish in anything that supports life, but they won't touch white flour. There is no nourishment to be found in it. So once again, we are eating food-like substances, but we aren't eating food. In fact, in a recent study of a group of rats fed solely enriched white flour for 90 days, 2/3 died of malnutrition, and the remaining third was on the brink of death, and their growth was severely stunted. And they use rats and mice because they breed so quickly and their lifespan is comparatively short, so they can see how various issues will affect the life of an individual. And they then relate that to a human, because obviously a mouse or a rat lasts only a relatively short period of time, 1 or 2 years, and a human lasts a whole lot longer than that, hopefully. Even more interesting is the fact that during World War II, the wheat germ was added back into bread rationing in Britain to keep the people healthy. So they'd seen where things were going south. They put back the stuff that they thought people didn't want. And amazingly, they got healthier. And I know there are stories as well of Japanese prisoners of war. And I think they were British and American soldiers, in fact, who they were suffering from a lot of ill health. And one of the prisoners was a doctor. And he managed to get some of this discarded bran and started feeding it to these sick prisoners. And amazingly, their health was returned and reversed, and they survived the prison camps. So you can see there that these are not complex research. This is not complex science. It's very simple observation. White flour was banned in almost all bakery products and replaced with wheat meal, which is a nearly whole wheat flour with the germ and bran added back in. Because of this decision, the British people were healthier than ever before, and the healthiest they've ever been since. Maybe we need to start adding this stuff back again. Once the war was over, the bran and germ were removed, and Britain's health declined again. And we can see where this is today. So what's so great about whole grains? Because you hear so many stories that, oh no, you mustn't have grain in your diet. You mustn't have whole grains because of the gluten, and it causes so many bad things. And I wish there were more people that would be able to see this whole story and get a better idea of why we actually do need those whole grains. I often read stories where doctors or dietitians will say, you don't need grain in your diet. You must remove grain, get rid of the bread. And to a certain extent, they are correct. You want to get rid of your baked white goods, but you don't really want to get rid of your whole grains. So whole grains are high in antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals. And they're rich with iron, magnesium, and fiber, and they reduce the risk of heart disease. They assist in diabetes management. They lower the risk of stroke. They fight or prevent cancer development. They support weight management. They boost energy metabolism. They reduce cholesterol and blood pressure, and a whole lot more than that. So this is just some of the things that actual true whole grains do. Sad part is a lot of things these days, again, it's a marketing ploy, will tell you it's whole grain. It's not. While you'd think it would be simple to add more whole grains to your diet, it isn't as easy as you think. Often products marked as containing whole grains only contain half whole grains and the other half are refined. And even those that do contain mostly whole grains don't possess the nutrients the body needs to stay healthy. And that's where Treonine comes in, literally meaning 3-in-1. Treonine is the oily, waxy residue found when the vitamin E is removed from wheat germs. My apologies. And just to clarify this for any guests that either are online right now that I can't see, or who will watch this later, I am going to be mentioning this particular product, which is a unique product, unique to the Neolife company. There is no other manufacturer that I am aware of today that produces whole grain or a whole grain supplement in the way that Neolife does. It is high in proteins, vitamins, minerals, unsaturated fats, lecithin, lipids, and sterols. And this collection of oils, fatty acids, and other nutrients is completely missing from our diets. So I actually think it must be quite simple for Neolife to get this, because they simply go along to a grain processing place and say, give us all the stuff that you've ditched as waste. And I'm obviously simplifying things, but they then use that to work towards your Treonine. Only Neolife has the patent for Treonine as a supplement, and their research on grain lipids, sterols, and their effect on the human body is astounding. Remember, this research stems back to 1948, before Neolife even became a company. Neolife became a company after this research was done. So over 60 years of research on the subject, they found a direct link between grain lipids and sterols and chronic fatigue. How many people do you know that you see on a daily basis of, oh, I'm so tired, I'm exhausted, it's Monday morning and I'm tired. And you see them at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning and they already look as though they've just finished the Comrades Marathon because they're exhausted. And this is how people go through every day of their life. They wake up tired. They go to bed tired and they wake up tired. I can't think of anything worse. And this fatigue is something that I found very scary when I had COVID, because I had technically chronic fatigue for a short period of time. It was not fun. I do not understand how people can live with this for years. We also found that without the grain concentrates now lacking in our diet, cell membranes within the body cannot function properly to the point that nutrients can't get in and waste can't get out. And if you think about your car, if you drive a car, you might not be mechanically minded, but you'll have understood it maybe, that if you drive a car with an extremely dirty oil filter, an extremely dirty air filter, and clogged up spark plugs, you will be able to drive your car, but it's going to have no power. It's going to backfire regularly, and it's going to use a significant amount of fuel. So it's not going to be a very economical vehicle to drive. So the research that was done over here, you can see the full article under on the website imageawareness.com under newsletters. This is taken from Dr. Jim McAfee's information, and he did a little bit more research or more deeper diving in the near-life history. So the story of GNLD or near-life begins in the 1930s and the 1940s. Let's just check my time over here. Movie stars and other individuals were entering the North Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital complaining of fatigue. Now, these people were ones who had access to the best of everything. And doctors were at a loss to ascribe a cause for this condition and lacked the insight to provide a solution, because we're talking 1930s, 1940s technology, where a person comes to them, they are, in their time, extremely wealthy, eating some of the best foods available. And remember, food back then was still a lot healthier than it is now. And yet they were always tired. They were fatigued. But medically, there was nothing wrong with them. Now, there was a professor, Jaroslav Herofsky, that developed a piece of equipment prior to World War II called the polarograph. And this invention was refined into a fine piece of diagnostic equipment over the years. Herofsky won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1959 for his invention of the polarograph. After World War II, physicians at the Hollywood Hospital obtained a polarograph and began using it to assess the endocrine functioning of patients suffering with different degenerative diseases and puzzling conditions. The researchers were particularly interested in the relationship between fatigue and glandular functioning. And this research began in 1946 and was completed in 1958. The research team was headed by Dr. J.A. Restifo. Polarograph revealed that endocrine abnormalities underlie many of the degenerative conditions and symptoms of fatigue being experienced by patients at the hospital. One remarkable observation was the fact that growing old was associated with the problems being experienced. And isn't that the same issue that we have these days, where people are getting older? And I often have this fight with patients who are in their 40s, and they go, oh, I'm getting old these days. And, I've got this creaking knee. I've got this painful back. I've got no energy. I just want to sit because I'm tired. It's not because they're getting old. Has anybody tried to keep up with Charlie recently? Many people who were quite young were suffering problems which were generally associated with growing old. And I've seen extremely old 30-year-olds, and I've seen extremely young 90-year-olds. Testing indicated that assimilation of nutrients appeared to be a key factor in contributing to health problems. Poor assimilation or deficiency of amino acids, vitamins, and minerals was indicated. Researchers attempted to reverse the abnormalities they were observing with the Polarograph with dozens of different supplements. None of these vitamin, mineral, and amino acid supplements normalized the abnormalities being observed with the Polarograph. And this is possibly where that original notion comes from, that you don't need to take a supplement because they don't work. They become very expensive, vitamin P. And partly because they're testing with supplements that don't work correctly and that are not absorbed correctly. Like with anything, if your body cannot absorb it, use it, and process it, it's useless because you're not getting what you need out of it. Around this time, the technology to extract vitamin E from wheat germ was developed. Processors observed a lipid and sterol residue which remained after the vitamin E extraction. The research team at the Hollywood Hospital observed that similar lipids and sterols were removed in the processing of rice and soybeans. They developed a concentrate of these oils which came to be known as treanin, which is Greek for 3-in-1. After developing the treanin concentrate, researchers began comparing the results of 3-factor supplementation with vitamins, minerals, and amino acids with 4-factor supplementation, which included the lipids, sterols from grain and legumes. Are we starting to see something that looks possibly familiar? The researchers soon observed dramatic improvement in energy levels and Polarograph measurements after adding the treanin oils to the nutritional regimen of patients. So they took different vitamins, minerals, and amino acids, which were available and are still available. And all they did was they added the whole grain oils, or the lipids and sterols. And the results were mind-blowing. While these studies revealed nutrient deficiencies of vitamins, minerals, and amino acids, it was the lipid and sterol fraction which was being overlooked in most medical considerations. I'm going to stop around about here because I would like to get into the story a little bit more in depth next week. And we've still got about 8 minutes left, but I thought I'd just open up and allow anybody who has got questions at this stage to ask questions before I get into the next section when we start talking about the athletes that were being tested with us. Anybody have any questions or comments so far?
Sure. No, this is good. This is good. This is very good detail. Just wish more people would listen to this if I sent it to them. Yeah, this is good. Excellent, excellent.
Absolutely.
Sure.